Personality assessment. The measurement of personal qualities is known as personality assessment. Personality assessments assess feelings, emotions, or emotional states, worries, motives, and attitudes. We can also refer to it as the judging, evaluation, and measurement of a person's general personality pattern or personality traits. Personality assessment that we study and practice today has grown from the realization that people differ from each other in how they think, how they feel, and how they act, and are therefore likely to behave in their own specific ways. The method employed by personality assessment specialists is based on the notion that much of the visible variety in behavior between people is due to differences in the extent to which people have certain underlying personal qualities. The assessment specialist's goal is to describe these characteristics, objectively measure them, and link them to socially meaningful features of behavior. The endeavor to characterize human characteristics in quantitative terms whenever possible is a distinguishing element of the scientific approach to personality evaluation. How much of a trait does an individual display? How many different qualities are there? Assessment is the final result of gathering data in order to develop psychological theory and raise the likelihood of making sound decisions in real-world situations. For example, selecting the most promising people from a group of job applicants. An example, Robert, Mark, and Norman are college students and all want to be teachers. Robert is quiet and shy. He lacks self-confidence and usually follows others. He's a kind person, but he lacks the motivation. Mark is loud and lively. He's a leader. He works hard, but he is thoughtless and drinks too much on weekends. Norman is thoughtful and well-liked. He's a trustworthy, but sometimes he has difficulty making quick decisions. Of these three men, who will make the best teacher? What qualities and personality factors make someone a good teacher? What makes someone a bad or dangerous teacher? A teacher's job is very high in stress. The Ministry of Education wants to make sure they hire the right people. Personality testing can be used for this purpose, to screen applicants wishing to join teacher training colleges and for employment. Personality measurement methods are divided into various categories based on the sort of information gathered and the methods employed to collect it. Self-report inventories. Self-report inventories are a kind of objective test used to assess personality. They typically use multiple choice items on numbered scales, which represent a range from 1 to 5. 1, strongly disagree. 2, somewhat disagree. 3, no opinion. 4, somewhat agree. And 5, strongly agree. Those are just examples. I work on examples of items. I work well when I work alone. So give us the answer. Do you strongly disagree? Somewhat disagree? No opinion? Somewhat agree? Strongly agree? Or number 2, I work well with others. Give us your response. They are often called Likert scales. They are named because they are named after their developed. Likert scales, which is named after their developer Francis Likert, 1932. One of the most widely used personality inventories is the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory, MMPI. MMPI, first published in 1943. It had 504 true-false questions. It was updated to the MMPI 2 in 1989 with 567 questions. The original MMPI was based on a small, limited sample composed mostly of Minnesota farmers and psychiatric patients. The revised inventory, the MMPI-2, takes 1 to 2 hours to complete and is based on a more representative national sample to allow for better standardization. Responses are scored to produce a clinical profile composed of 10 scales: hypochondriasis, depression, hysteria, psychopathic deviance, social deviance, that is, masculinity versus femininity, paranoia, psychasthenia, obsessive compulsive qualities, schizophrenia, hypomania, and social introversion. There is also a scale to ascertain risk factor for alcohol abuse. In 2008, the test was again revised to the MMPI-2RF using more advanced methods. The version takes about half the time to complete and has only 338 questions. Typically, the tests are administered by computer. Although the MMPI was originally developed to assist in the clinical diagnosis of psychological disorder, it is now also used for occupational screening, such as in law enforcement and in college or career or marital counseling. Just an example. I would enjoy the work of a teacher. True or false? These true-false questions resemble the kind of question you will find on the MMPI. In addition to clinical scales, the test also have validity and reliability scales. One of the validity scale, the Lie scale or L scale, consists of 15 items and is used to ascertain whether the respondent is faking good, that is, underreporting psychological problems to appear healthier. For example, if someone responds yes to a number of unrealistically positive items such as, I have never told a lie, they may be trying to fake good or appear better than they actually are. Reliability scales test an instrument's consistency over time, assuring that if you take the MMPI-2RF today and then again you take it 5 years later, your two scores will be similar. But research has been done by different people like Butler, Nussbaum, and Meredith in 1988. They gave the MMPI to newly recruited police officers, and then after 2 years, they gave the same police officers the same instrument. So after 2 years on the job, police officers' responses indicated an increased vulnerability to alcoholism and somatic symptoms, that is, vague and unexplained physical complaints and anxiety. When the test was given an additional 2 years later, that's now 4 years, 4 years after starting the job, the results suggested high risk for alcohol-related difficulties. We have the projective tests. Another method for assessment of personality is projective testing. This kind of test relies on one of the defense mechanisms proposed by Freud, Sigmund Freud, projection, as a way to assess unconscious processes. During this type of testing, a series of ambiguous cards is shown to the person being tested, who then is encouraged to project his feelings, impulses, and desires onto the cards by telling a story or interpreting an image or completing a sentence. Many objective tests have undergone standardization procedures and can be used to assess whether someone has unusual thoughts or a high level of anxiety or is likely to become unstable. Some examples of projective tests are the Rorschach, Inkblot test, and then the thematic perception test, TAD. Then the contemporized themes concerning black test, and then the themas, tell me a story, and the Rota incomplete sentence blank, RISB. The Rorschach Inkblot test was developed in 1921 by a Swiss psychologist named Hermann Rorschach. It is a series of symmetrical inkblots, cards, that are presented to a client by a psychologist. Upon presentation of each card, the psychologist asks the client, what might this be? What the test taker sees reveals unconscious feelings and struggles. The Rorschach has been standardized and is effective in measuring depression, psychosis, and anxiety. A second projective test is the thematic perception test, TAD, created in the 1930s by Henry Murray, an American psychologist, and a psychoanalyst named Christiana Morgan. A person taking the TAD is shown ambiguous pictures and is asked to tell a story about each picture. The story gives insight into the person's social world. They reveal the person's hopes, fears, interests, and goals. The storytelling format helps to lower a person's resistance and reveals the unconscious personal details. The TAD has been used in clinical settings to evaluate psychological disorders, and more recently, it has been used in counseling settings to help clients gain a better understanding of themselves and achieve personal growth. Standardization of tests administration is virtually non-existent among clinicians, and the test tends to be modest to low on validity and reliability, according to Aronow and his friends, 2001. Despite these shortcomings, the TAD has been one of the most commonly or widely used projective tests. A third projective test is the Rota Incomplete Sentence Blank, RISB. Rota Incomplete Sentence Blank, RISB, developed by Julian Rota in 1950. There are 3 forms of this test, and they are used with different age groups. The forms are the school form, the college form, and the adult form. The test includes 40 incomplete sentences that people are asked to complete as quickly as possible. The average time for completing the test is approximately 20 minutes, as responses are only 1 to 2 words in length. The test is similar to a word association test, and like other types of projective tests, it is assumed that responses will reveal desires, fears, and struggles. The RISB is used in screening college students for adjustment problems and in career counseling. Example, complete these sentences. I feel ... My mother ... I regret ... At home ... My greatest worry is... These incomplete sentences resemble the types of questions on the RISP. For many decades, these traditional projective tests have been used in cross-cultural personality assessment. However, it was found that test bias limited their usefulness by studies done by Hoy, Watkins, and Jenkins-Moore, 2008. It is difficult to assess the personalities and lifestyles of members of a widely divergent ethnic cultural groups using personality instruments based on data from a single culture. Studies done by the same people, Hoy, Watkins, and Jenkins-Moore, 2008, have revealed that, for example, when the test was used with African American test takers, the result was often shorter story length and low levels of cultural identification. Doesn't 2005. Therefore, it was vital to develop other personality assessments that explored factors such as race, language, and level of socialization. To address this need, Robert Williams developed the first culturally specific projective test designed to reflect the everyday life experience of African Americans. The updated version of the instrument is the Contemporized Themes Concerning Blacks test. Contemporized Themes Concerning Blacks test, CTCB, Williams, 1972. The CTCB contains 20 color images that show scenes of African American lifestyles. When the CTCB was compared with the TAD for African Americans, it was found that use of the CTCB led to increased story length, higher degree of positive feelings, and stronger identification with the CTCB, according to research done by Hoy, 1997, Hoy, Watkins, and Jenkins-Moore, 2008. The TEMAS multicultural thematic perception test is another tool designed to be culturally relevant to minority groups, especially Hispanic youths. TEMAS, meaning tell me a story, but which is also a play on the Spanish word temas, themes, uses images and storytelling cues that relate to minority culture. This according to Constantino, 1982. Just to give a summary, personality tests are techniques designed to measure one's personality. They are used to diagnose psychological problems as well as to screen candidates for college and employment. There are two types of personality tests: self-report inventories and projective tests. The MMPI is one of the most common self-report inventories. It asks a series of true-false questions that are designed to provide a clinical profile of an individual. Projective tests use ambiguous images or other ambiguous stimuli to assess an individual's unconscious fears, desires, and challenges. The Rorschach Inc. plots test, the TAD, the RISP, and the CTCB are all forms of projective test. If somebody asks, why might a prospective employer screen applicants using personality assessment? You want to employ people. Why should you screen them using personality assessment test? Personality assessment test can help an employer predict a candidate's reaction and attitudes to various situations they might encounter on the job, therefore helping choose the right person for the job. This is particularly important in hiring for a high-risk job such as law enforcement, like the army, the police force. Personality tests can also reveal a potential employee's desirable qualities such as honesty, motivation, and how careful are they? That's called seriousness. Why should a clinician give someone a projective test? Why? A projective test could give the clinician hints about dreams, fears, and personal struggles of which the client may be unaware of, since these tests are designed to reveal the unconscious motivation and attitudes. They can also help clinicians diagnose psychological disorders. So we have come across words like contemporized themes concerning blacks, CTCB. These are projective tests designed to be culturally relevant to African Americans using images that relate to African American culture. And then we have also come across the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory, MMPI. These are personality tests composed of a series of true false questions in order to establish a clinical profile of an individual. Then we've come across the projective tests. These are personality assessments in which a person responds to ambiguous stimuli, revealing hidden feelings, impulses, and desires. Then there are the Rorschach ink plot tests. These are projective tests that employs a series of symmetrical ink plot cards that are presented to a client by a psychologist in an effort to reveal the person's unconscious desires, his fears, and his struggles. Rota incomplete sentence blank, RISP. These are projective tests that is similar to a word association test in which a person completes sentences in order to reveal their unconscious desires, their fears, and struggles. We have TEMAS, multicultural thematic apperception test. These are projective tests designed to be culturally relevant to minority groups, especially Hispanic youth, using images and storytelling that relate to minority culture. Then we have the thematic apperception test, TAD, projective test in which people are presented with ambiguous images and are then asked to make up stories to go with the images in an effort to uncover their unconscious desires, their fears, and their struggles. We can look at the interview. Of course, interviewing as a method, of course, it has already been covered earlier, but under what we've discussed. But let's just look at interview specifically. And this is the oldest and the most common technique that has always been used to assess personality. It gives unlimited opportunity to explore any area that the interviewer believes will aid in the assessment of personality. And there are two types of interviews, the structured and the unstructured interviews. In the structured interview, interviewer asks the same set of questions in a particular order to all individuals participating in the study. The interviewer reads the questions and then records the responses. In the unstructured interview, the interviewer might begin anywhere, proceed in any direction. He can change the focus of the interview. The content of the interview depends upon the wishes of the interviewer. The interviewer lets the individual speak freely so as to get a clear picture of the individual. From what the interviewee says, the interviewer identifies his or her interests, her problems, her limitations. The interviewer's primary focus during an employment interview, for example, is on the job. Then he has to look at the candidate's work experience, general and specific attitudes, and occupational aspirations. During a diagnostic or medical or a psychiatric interview, the patient's physical health and any signs of behavioral illness that may have developed over time will be given special consideration. There are two sorts of interviews and then can be distinguished: the research and the clinical interview. In research, there is face-to-face interaction between an interviewer and an interviewee and is intended towards eliciting information that may be important to specific practical application and a general study, or to personality theories testing hypotheses. The clinical interview, on the other hand, is focused on assessing the state of a specific individual, for example, a mental patient. It is action-oriented. It may indicate appropriate treatment for the patient. Obtaining an individual's life history and biographical information is common in both research and clinical interviews, but the uses to which the information is put differs. Although it is important to quantify all of the events that take place during an interview, personality psychologists have developed methods for categorizing many aspects of what a person has stated. The specific categories employed in this methodology is known as content analysis. It is determined by the researcher's interest and imagination, but the process of content analysis is relatively universal, in that it entails the creation of a system of categories that can be used reliably by an analyst or a scholar. The categories could be simple, for example, just noting down the number of words spoken by the interviewee at specific time periods, or they will be based on inferences. For example, the degree of personal unhappiness the interviewee appears to express. The value of content analysis is that it allows you to describe verbal behaviors using frequency of uttered responses and establishes behavioral variables for more or less precise examination in experimental research. For example, content analysis has been used to track changes in attitude as they develop over time in a person. There are challenges: the complexity of the interview scenario, the interviewee's attitude, anxieties and expectation, and the interviewer's manner and training are all potential sources of incorrect inferences drawn from face-to-face contacts. But they also have strength. These sources of interview invalidity and unreliability have been identified. They have been controlled and eliminated through research. It is possible to shed light on the reliability of the information derived by conducting multiple interviews with the same interviewee. And you can also use multiple interviewers to evaluate the subject behavior by conducting multiple interviews with the same interviewee, and using multiple interviewers to evaluate the subject's behavior. The use of standardized interviews approach, such as using the same set of questions by all interviewers, help to boost the trustworthiness of the information acquired. However, standardization can limit the amount of information obtained, and even the most trustworthy, the most constant interview technique might result in inaccurate judgments. Thank you.